Carl Jung noted that profound thinkers endure a distinct kind of psychological strain that most individuals never encounter. This isn't physical suffering or emotional distress from past events, but a condition he termed consciousness fatigue. It is the deep exhaustion that arises from perceiving too much, comprehending things too deeply, and being unable to silence one's awareness in a culture that champions superficiality. Imagine this scene. You're at a social gathering where everyone is enjoying light-hearted jokes, talking about the weather, and exchanging harmless rumors. The conversation flows effortlessly around you. But when it's your turn, when you contribute something substantive, something authentic that pierces through the social performance, the atmosphere changes. The laughter subsides. People shift uncomfortably. Someone quickly changes the topic. You then feel that familiar ache of being too intense for the environment you are in. Jung dedicated decades to analyzing what occurs when an individual's consciousness expands beyond what is socially acceptable. He found that the more psychologically mature you become, the more profound your sense of isolation grows. This is not because you are flawed, but because you perceive reality from an entirely different level of awareness than the collective. This isn't a matter of intellectual superiority. It's a fundamental change in the way you interpret the world. And once this transformation occurs, Jung found, there is no returning to a state of unconscious engagement with life. However, he also uncovered something crucial. This difficult awakening fulfills a vital evolutionary role that most deep thinkers are unaware they are part of: the burden of seeing. In 1913, Jung underwent what he termed his confrontation with the unconscious. While many viewed it as a mental breakdown, his personal journals describe something far more significant. As his awareness broadened, ordinary social interactions became almost psychologically intolerable, not due to arrogance, but because of the immense energy needed to connect different planes of understanding. This crisis revealed a fundamental truth about deep thinkers. You are no longer just managing your own inner world. Therefore, you become what Jung described as a processor of unconscious material, automatically taking in and filtering the emotional static that others unknowingly project into every conversation. Consider your most recent team meeting. Everyone is gathered discussing quarterly figures, but you are sensing the unresolved friction between two colleagues from a past disagreement. You feel your manager's underlying anxiety about their presentation, despite their confident demeanor. You see how another colleague avoids any mention of accountability. Consequently, by the meeting's end, you feel drained, not from the business discussion, but from processing the entire room's unspoken emotional landscape. Jung noted in his clinical work, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Yet his private correspondence reveals the deep solitude this can bring. It's like being awake in a room where everyone else is talking in their sleep. But that isn't the hardest part. The true weight is realizing you cannot switch it off. You see past the social masks people wear. You identify the psychological projections fueling their heated political views. You grasp how formative childhood experiences dictate adult behavioral loops. Consequently, every interaction demands that you pretend not to see what you clearly perceive, not to understand the hidden dynamics beneath the surface. This constant act of translation becomes mentally depleting. The social energy drain. When you are highly conscious, you act as a magnet for the unconscious. Jung's patient records frequently documented this occurrence, with highly developed individuals reporting a mysterious exhaustion following group events. Jung figured out the reason. Elena, a patient of Jung's who worked as a therapist, felt utterly depleted after staff meetings. Through their analysis, she discovered she wasn't merely participating. She was unconsciously absorbing the unsaid tensions, projected feelings, and shadow dynamics of her colleagues. But what Jung found most significant was that she wasn't attempting to help them. Her consciousness had just become so finely tuned that this unconscious material felt like psychological noise she couldn't ignore. Thus, Jung defined this as psychological contamination. Your heightened sensitivity is an asset in conscious settings, but becomes a handicap in unconscious ones. This leads to a destructive pattern. You begin to steer clear of social gatherings because they exhaust you. But in doing so, others label you as antisocial or withdrawn. As a result, you face a difficult choice: engage and feel depleted, or retreat and be misunderstood. But there's an additional layer Jung uncovered that adds to this complexity. Once you have connected with your authentic self, wearing social masks becomes truly agonizing. Before this awakening, you could unconsciously adopt any role required by a situation. But afterward, reverting to persona-based behavior creates what Jung privately termed existential nausea. You sit in board meetings acting as if your corporate identity matters, knowing it's just a facade. You attend family events playing parts that no longer fit you. You sustain friendships built on a shared unconsciousness, even when you have moved beyond the patterns that once united you. In essence, your psyche resists betraying your genuine self simply to maintain social harmony. Jung's journals express his own internal battle. I can no longer act the part of the proper Swiss psychiatrist when I have witnessed depths that psychiatry itself denies. The performance feels like a form of death. But this is not where the story concludes. It is, in fact, the start of something essential. If you've felt this fatigue from pretending to be a version of yourself you've outgrown, comment, "I can't perform anymore." The archetypal withdrawal pattern. Jung's anthropological work brought a remarkable insight to light. Historically, every culture has recognized what he named the hermit phase, a vital stage of psychological and spiritual growth. This retreat isn't a pathology, it's an archetype. The hermit figure emerges universally because the process of individuation demands periods of detachment from collective pressures. You cannot integrate your own shadow while being urged to maintain a pleasing persona. You cannot find your true voice while constantly bending to others' expectations. Thus, Jung saw that conscious withdrawal is crucial for individual growth. His clinical work, however, showed a distinct sequence that every awakening individual goes through. Phase 1 is recognition. You start to see how much energy routine social life consumes. You find you need more time alone to process your life. You begin to notice patterns in others that you are no longer willing to unconsciously participate in. This awareness, however, creates an inner conflict because the desire to belong remains. Therefore, Phase 2, selective disengagement, follows. You grow more particular about which settings are nourishing and which are draining. You decline commitments that force you into old personas. You start to look for others who function from a similar level of consciousness. This careful selection, however, is often perceived as rejection by those from whom you are distancing yourself. Then, Phase 3, integration and return, begins. After a period of solitude, you re-engage with the world, but from a completely altered standpoint. You are no longer seeking acceptance or trying to fit in. You offer your authentic self to those who are open to it. You return transformed, able to participate consciously without losing your core identity. Jung's case studies highlighted something critical. Everyone who experiences a genuine spiritual awakening follows this precise path. They return with a gift that society needs but doesn't yet understand: the invisible contribution. Dr. Heinrich Weber, one of Jung's patients, vanished from his academic circle for a year and a half. His peers thought he had a breakdown, but Jung understood it differently. Weber had a breakthrough in solitude. He integrated profound insights about the human psyche that would have been inaccessible while upholding his academic identity. When he came back, he transformed his entire field, but only after the essential withdrawal period enabled full integration. This illustrates Jung's most vital insight about conscious withdrawal. It is not a rejection of society, but a preparation for authentic service to it. The contribution, however, manifests in ways most people do not anticipate. Jung's term border dwellers perfectly captures these returned hermits. They are present in the world but not owned by it. They have learned how to engage without sacrificing themselves, to give without compromising their truth. Consequently, they act from conscious intention instead of unconscious impulse. Border dwellers might start businesses that value employee wellness over pure profit. They create art that speaks to the soul's depths instead of providing mere entertainment. They offer healing that targets root issues rather than just managing symptoms. They cultivate communities centered on genuine connection instead of shared unconscious habits. Most importantly, their very presence shows that other ways of living are achievable. Jung's letters reveal a fascinating detail. Conscious individuals become selectively visible after their integration. They remain unseen by those seeking shallow validation, but are clearly perceived by others ready for authentic engagement. Thus, they exist on the periphery of society while maintaining deep connections with those on a similar developmental journey. Jung's research on group dynamics showed that consciousness spreads like a contagion, but only when it's fully integrated. Partially conscious individuals often create more confusion by trying to awaken others before their time. In contrast, fully individuated people naturally transmit awareness by their very being. They aren't proselytizing or coercing. They are simply living from a higher level of awareness, which makes alternative ways of life visible to those prepared to see. Comment below if your very presence seems to make certain people uneasy. I don't try to wake people up. They just sense something different. The collective evolutionary purpose. But here is what Jung discovered that changes the entire perspective. This arduous path is not solely for individual development. It serves the evolution of the collective. Jung predicted that humanity would encounter global challenges that would demand widespread psychological growth. He believed that individuals who used stable periods to develop their consciousness would become crucial guides during times of collective upheaval. We are seeing this prediction play out now, though the process is more subtle than most imagine. Jung's analysis of cultural shifts revealed that conscious withdrawal places what biologists term evolutionary pressure on unconscious systems. When awakened individuals cease their participation in dysfunctional dynamics, those dynamics must either adapt or fail. This change unfolds gradually, system by system. Companies lose their most creative minds to more conscious enterprises. Relationships founded on unconscious agreements fall apart when one person refuses to play their part. Political ideologies lose followers who begin to see through their psychological manipulations. Consequently, this creates a selection pressure that encourages more conscious alternatives to rise. This transfer occurs through what Jung called morphic resonance, shifts in consciousness that propagate through a community without direct instruction or argument. Your personal development contributes to collective growth in ways you might never directly observe. But an even deeper process is at play. During periods of withdrawal, conscious people function as humanity's research and development department. They are pioneering new relationship models that value authenticity over performance. They are designing economic systems that serve life instead of exploitation. They are investigating healing methods that address root problems over symptoms. They are creating lifestyles that support both personal and planetary health. Therefore, when the wider culture is prepared for these advancements, the working models are already established and ready. Jung's study of group dynamics showed that the awakening of consciousness follows what is now known as critical mass dynamics. You do not need everyone to awaken for a collective shift to happen. You only need a sufficient number of people operating from genuine awareness to reach a tipping point. As a result, those who are quietly retreating from society to do their inner work are not deserting the collective. They are participating in a natural process that is preparing humanity for its next stage of development. Jung understood something many spiritual teachers overlook. Transformation spans generations. The parents who step back to cultivate consciousness raise children who see authentic living and conscious relationships as normal. Consequently, these children mature into adults who establish institutions, relationships, and cultural norms rooted in psychological maturity rather than unconscious conditioning. Today's hermits are laying the groundwork for tomorrow's conscious society. Jung's clinical perspective, however, stressed that each individual must define their own relationship with this collective awakening. Some are called to retreat and nurture consciousness in solitude. Others are meant to reform systems from the inside. Still others are meant to be builders of bridges between conscious and unconscious groups. Thus, no single path is inherently better. The collective requires conscious individuals in all roles: hermits cultivating wisdom, cultural agents transforming institutions, bridge builders fostering communication, and pioneers demonstrating new possibilities. But there is a critical difference between healthy and unhealthy withdrawal that every deep thinker needs to grasp: the shadow of spiritual development. While Jung affirmed conscious withdrawal as essential, his clinical work also highlighted its shadow forms. Spiritual awakening can morph into spiritual bypassing when it is used to evade, rather than engage with, the full spectrum of human experience. Jung's psychiatric work pinpointed spiritual inflation as a primary risk for awakening individuals. When people confuse psychological growth with being superior, they use their consciousness as another form of ego defense instead of true transcendence. The warning signs, however, are subtle. You may start to believe you are too advanced for ordinary human experiences like grief, anger, or fear. You might use spiritual ideas to shirk responsibility in practical areas like finances, health, or relationships. You might develop disdain for those operating unconsciously instead of feeling compassion. You might become fixated on being the most conscious person in any setting. Therefore, you are using withdrawal to shun feedback that could threaten your self-perception. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. This includes accepting that you are still human, still evolving, and still capable of unconscious actions, even after substantial growth." But there is another shadow pattern Jung observed. Jung's therapeutic records detail cases where individuals became addicted to the safety of solitude, using withdrawal to avoid the messy reality of human connection. He called this hermit neurosis, the act of confusing isolation with enlightenment. Healthy withdrawal, however, recharges you for eventual re-engagement. Unhealthy withdrawal grows progressively more isolating, leading to depression, anxiety, and a loss of connection to one's own humanity. Therefore, Jung's clinical work showed that genuine individuation always circles back to community, but from a more authentic place. If your awakening is diminishing your capacity for love, connection, and service, something has gone awry. The integration challenge. Jung's therapeutic files demonstrate that withdrawal is a preparation for a completely different type of social interaction, one based on authenticity over performance, service over need, and contribution over consumption. But this re-entry demands a specific skill set. When you feel ready to re-engage after integrating, Jung's methods suggest a gradual approach that respects both your own development and others' readiness for authentic contact. Consequently, you begin with low-risk interactions where you can practice being yourself without the need to perform or change anyone. This could involve conversations with strangers who have no preconceived notions of you. It might be volunteer work where your contribution matters more than your popularity. It could be creative circles where genuine expression is prized, or professional settings where your distinct viewpoint is valued. But a fundamental shift must occur first. Jung's case studies show that post-integration social life feels entirely different because your motivation changes from seeking something, approval, validation, belonging, to offering something, presence, wisdom, genuine connection. As a result, this change alleviates anxiety and the pressure to perform, because your sense of self-worth is no longer tied to others' reactions. But Jung found that the true measure of integration is not just your ability to engage authentically. It's your ability to maintain your consciousness within imperfect systems without being overwhelmed or compromised. Jung's final insight on conscious re-engagement is learning what he called conscious participation without absorption. This demands clear boundaries about which unconscious dynamics you will and will not engage with. It requires skills for offering your authentic presence without being consumed by others' unconsciousness. It relies on support networks of others who share your dedication to conscious living. Consequently, you remember that your primary duty is to maintain your own awareness, not to awaken anyone else. This generates what Jung termed morphic resonance, shifts in consciousness that ripple through groups without direct instruction. Your personal development adds to the collective's evolution in ways you may never see. The call to authentic living. If you have felt the urge to pull back, to step away from unconscious social life, Jung's work implies that you recognize humanity is need for people who have done their inner work to navigate the challenges and potentials of our collective awakening. Your withdrawal is not an escape from life. It is preparation for a more genuine version of it. You are not forsaking humanity. You are cultivating something humanity desperately needs, but does not yet know how to build. Thus, Jung saw that conscious withdrawal is a temporary recharge that enables awakened people to return and provide authentic connection. Jung discovered that the path of the conscious individual is ultimately a path of trust, trusting the timing of your own growth, trusting that your authentic path serves a purpose greater than yourself, trusting that your individual awakening contributes to collective healing in ways you may never directly observe. Whether your journey involves withdrawal, re-engagement, or a path that is uniquely yours, Jung's work shows that deep thinkers are not afflicted with a disorder. They are participating in humanity's slow awakening to more conscious ways of life. Therefore, the pain you feel is not a penalty for being different. It is the growing pains of human evolution. The world requires your depth, your inquiries, your refusal of surface-level explanations. Not a filtered version of you, not a toned-down version, not an agreeable-on-demand version. It needs your authentic presence, your readiness to see with clarity, and your courage to live consciously, even when it is difficult. Recall that moment at the gathering when your authentic remark shifted the entire room. That wasn't you being too much. That was consciousness encountering unconsciousness. And in that instant, you offered everyone there a look at a deeper possibility, regardless of whether they were ready to see it. Jung believed that the deep thinkers of today become the wisdom keepers of tomorrow. Your personal journey toward psychological maturity is not selfish. It is essential preparation for the part you will play in humanity's collective awakening. Therefore, trust this process, honor your true path, and know that your consciousness is more significant than you realize. If you are learning to trust your own unique developmental pace, comment, "I honor my authentic path." If this journey through Jung's insights stirred something deep within you, let's continue to explore these psychological landscapes together. Like this video, if you have ever felt the weight of consciousness fatigue or the pull toward authentic withdrawal, comment below with a single word that captures how this exploration made you feel. Subscribe to stay in touch with others who are walking the path of conscious development. And remember, in a world that often misinterprets depth, you will always find understanding here. Your consciousness is not a burden to carry alone. It is a gift you are preparing to share with the world when the time is right. Thank you for joining this exploration of what Jung called the privilege and burden of becoming who you truly are. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.